Okay, welcome students to chapter 11, and this is where we'll be talking about blood, the functions of blood, what composes blood, a couple disorders, blood types, and then blood clotting. So here are the functions of blood. It's like your body's transportation system for all hormones, nutrients, gases, and wastes. It works as part of your body's protection against disease-causing agents and clotting, and regulation. It helps to regulate pH and temperature. It's made of plasma and formed elements. Plasma is the liquid that makes up about 55% of the blood. It's mainly water, and then 7% of it is ions, dissolved gases, hormones, plasma proteins, and waste products. The formed elements of blood are the cellular components of blood, so the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and this makes up about 45% of the blood. This is a common picture you should be familiar with. When they take your blood as a sample, it looks completely red, and then they centrifuge it, spin it down extremely quickly, and it separates out so that the plasma is on the top. The formed elements will be on the bottom, and the formed elements again consist of your red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Your platelets are cell fragments essential to help clot your blood. If you get injured, they'll go to that location and try to keep your blood from stop bleeding, basically. And your white blood cells defend the body against disease, and you have 5 different types of white blood cells. White blood cells are also called leukocytes, and red blood cells transport oxygen in your body, and those are called erythrocytes. Plasma proteins, they help balance water flow between blood and cells. They can be albumins, globulins, or clotting proteins. These are the formed elements in platelets then, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and they all arise from stem cells within red bone marrow, which give rise to the formed elements. So this is just showing how all of your different formed elements, your blood cells, arise from one unique stem cell, and this stem cell will go on and form a different type of cell that will eventually lead to one of the formed elements, whether it's a white blood cell, platelet, or red blood cell. So here's a look at the formed elements of blood, the red blood cell, the 5 different types of leukocytes, or white blood cells, and then platelets, the number of them in your body, then their average lifespan. Red blood cells transport oxygen. They're called erythrocytes. They're shaped like biconcave discs and have great flexibility. There's no nucleus in them when they're mature, and that's because they're designed specifically to contain as much hemoglobin as possible. And hemoglobin is a protein that transports oxygen. Oxygen binding pigment in the red blood cells gives it its color. The structure of hemoglobin has 4 subunits, and each subunit has a polypeptide chain and a heme group in the middle with an iron attached to an oxygen. Red blood cells and hemoglobin continued. Oxyhemoglobin is hemoglobin bound with oxygen, and that will give it a more reddish color to it. And hemoglobin has a much greater affinity for carbon monoxide than for oxygen. So carbon monoxide poisoning in it is extremely dangerous because carbon monoxide is odorless and tasteless. You can't smell it. It's not like the gas that you normally smell. It's a poison, but carbon monoxide will bind to hemoglobin much more readily than oxygen will. So that's why carbon monoxide is so dangerous, because it won't allow oxygen to be delivered to your cells. So here's a look at red blood cells, erythrocytes. They're biconcave, no nucleus, designed that way specifically for carrying as much oxygen as possible. Here's a structure of hemoglobin with the 4 subunits, and in the middle, each polypeptide chain contains a heme group with an iron that will attach to oxygen. So each hemoglobin molecule can carry up to 4 oxygen molecules. You have about 250 million hemoglobins in each red blood cell. So when you think about it, each red blood cell, that one tiny cell, can carry about 1 billion oxygen molecules. The life cycle of red blood cells, they're produced in the red bone marrow, and they live about 120 days in the system. And then they undergo phagocytosis, which is the breaking down of them in the liver and your spleen. Hemoglobin will be degraded into the protein component and then be recycled. The production of red blood cells is regulated by negative feedback. The production typically matches destruction. So in the case of blood loss, the rate of red blood cell production will be increased, and your kidney cells control that. They can sense a reduced oxygen and produce a hormone called erythropoietin, which will stimulate the red bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. So this is a look at how the kidneys will increase the release of erythropoietin and tell your red bone marrow, to create more red blood cells. And when they sense that there's an increased oxygen delivery to tissues, they will inhibit the erythropoietin release. White blood cells are also called leukocytes, and they do have a nucleus. One type is produced in your lymph nodes and the other in the lymphoid tissue. Their general functions are to remove wastes, toxins, and damaged and abnormal cells. They help defend the body against disease. They can leave the circulatory system and move to the site of infection or tissue damage. And some are capable of phagocytosis, which is eating up of something foreign and breaking it apart. So here are red blood cells within a capillary or a blood vessel. White blood cells can squeeze through spaces between a capillary to actually leave your blood vessels and go to an area where there might be, here is showing a thorn puncturing the skin and bacteria forming, and the white blood cells will go to that area of infection to take care of it. There's 2 types of white blood cells based on the presence or absence of granules. And do the granulocytes possess these granules or little specks in them? And they're then classified on how they stain. So neutrophils do not stain anything when viewed under a microscope. Basophils will always stain purple, and eosinophils will stain pink. Agranulocytes lack these visible granules. Neutrophils are the most abundant granulocyte. They will engulf anything foreign, microbes, by phagocytosis and then try to stop infection. They're composed of pus, which is a liquid associated with infection. Eosinophils defend against parasitic worms. They lessen the severity of allergies. Basophils release histamine, which attracts other blood cells, white blood cells, and causes your blood vessels to dilate. So basophils play a role in some allergic reactions. Monocytes are the largest of the form elements, so they're a type of agranulocyte. They develop into macrophages, phagocytic cells, dead cells, and cellular debris. So they engulf anything foreign. And lymphocytes, there's 2 classes of lymphocytes, B and T. B lymphocytes give rise to plasma cells, which will produce antibodies. And an antibody is a protein that recognizes a specific molecule antigen on the surface of anything invading or foreign in the body. So an antibodies will recognize something that's foreign. T lymphocytes are called specialized white blood cells. They kill cells not recognized as coming from the body, specifically cells that are cancerous. Platelets are part of the formed elements. They're sometimes called thrombocytes. They're essential to blood clotting. They're fragments of larger precursor cells called megakaryocytes. Anemia is the blood's ability to carry oxygen is reduced. So anemia is a disorder in which your blood isn't able to carry adequate amounts of oxygen. It can result from too little hemoglobin, too few red blood cells, or both. The symptoms include fatigue, headaches, dizziness, paleness, breathlessness, and heart palpitations. You can have iron deficiency anemia, sickle cell anemia, or pernicious anemia. Iron deficiency anemia is the most common form, It leads to inadequate hemoglobin production, and the causes of it are usually a diet that contains too little iron, or an inability to absorb iron, or just the loss of blood. Hemolytic anemia, this is sickle cell anemia, occurs when red blood cells destruction exceeds production. This can be caused by an infection, a defect in the membrane of red blood cells, a transfusion of mismatched blood, or hemoglobin abnormalities. And then, sickle cell anemia is a specific type of hemolytic anemia. It's caused by abnormal hemoglobin, where your red blood cells will form a sickle shape when the blood's oxygen content is low. So your red blood cells will actually form this abnormal shape, which is not good. This will cause your red blood cells to be really fragile and rupture easily, which will promote clotting and also clog then the small blood vessels. Pernicious anemia is when there's not enough red blood cells to begin with. So the production of red blood cells depends on vitamin B12. This is an intrinsic factor absorbed by the stomach lining that helps the small intestine absorb vitamin B12 from the diet. So it's caused by the failure to produce intrinsic factor, which makes the absorption of vitamin B12 impossible. Infectious mononucleosis is a viral disease of the lymphocytes caused by an Epstein-Barr disease. It's spread from person to person orally. The symptoms include fever, headache, sore throat, and swollen lymph nodes. There's no treatment for this. This is when people get mono for long periods of time. This is what they're referring to. Leukemia is a cancer of white blood cells that causes the number of white blood cells to greatly increase, and then these abnormal cells will take over the bone marrow, preventing the development of other formed elements like red blood cells and platelets. Symptoms will include anemia and inadequate clotting and body defense mechanism. And then treatment for this usually involves radiation, chemotherapy, and a blood transfusion, and a bone marrow transplant can also help. Okay, then we'll get to blood types, which is probably one of the more confusing things about blood. Everyone has a specific blood type, and your blood type is named by the antigen or the protein found on the surface of your red blood cells. So if you're type A blood, you have an A antigen, a protein, attached to the surface of your red blood cells. If you're type B, you have the B antigen. Type AB blood has both A and B antigens. Type O is unique in that it has neither A nor B antigens. Agglutination occurs when someone's antibodies contact a foreign cell. So agglutination, we all have antibodies in our plasma for the opposing antigens that we don't have on our red blood cells. So our antibodies will attack foreign antigens that it doesn't recognize as self. And when it attacks those, it'll reach on and hold on to them and cause clumping. And this response can be used to determine blood type in a little bit. I'll show you that. But I would encourage you guys to watch this video. It's a great video on blood typing. So we can look for agglutination to determine blood type by taking little drops of blood in each well and adding antibodies to the drops of blood. And whichever one causes agglutination means that is the blood type that you're getting. So no agglutination means this would be antigen A, and there's an antibody B, so it wouldn't clump onto it. Agglutination only occurs when there's an antibody to A available, and it would reach out and touch A and grab onto it. So top is showing no agglutination, and the bottom is showing how when the antibodies clump on and reach out to touch these antigens, they form clumps within the blood, and that causes agglutination. So we know that this type of blood, the one with the wells where you see this clumping of blood occurring, that's the blood type that it would give you. So blood type O means O positive, means there's just an RH antigen available. The positive or negative just means that this RH antigen is either available or not. So the positive and negative is inherited independently, whether you are A or B. And if you're positive, you have the Rh antigen. And if you're negative, you do not have the Rh antigen. So here are the different types of blood. This is a great picture referencing this. If you're blood type A, you'll have antigens A on your red blood cells and antibodies against the B antigen. If you're blood type B, you'll have B antigens and antibodies against A in your red blood cells. And if you're type AB, you'll have both antigens and you won't have any antibodies because since you have both antigens, you won't create any antibodies, A or B, that would destroy yourself, your own red blood cells. Type O blood has neither antigens, so it creates both antibodies. Blood types that can be received from transfusions. You can receive blood from anyone with the same antigens or fewer. So type A people can receive from other types A or O. Type B can receive from B and O. AB is known as the universal donor because it can receive from AB, or O, and O can only receive from other O. So if you can remember that, you can receive blood from only people with the same antigens or fewer. Blood types were first discovered in the rhesus monkey, and this is another important antigen. It's called the rhesus factor. Individuals who have Rh antigens on their red blood cells are rhesus positive, and individuals who lack the Rh antigens are Rh negative. So everyone has a letter A, B, or O, and then we're all positive or negative. And the positive or negative just comes from this rhesus antigen. It's another antigen that you independently inherit from your parents. An Rh negative person will not form anti-Rh antibodies unless he or she has been exposed to the Rh antigen through a transfusion or having given birth to an Rh positive baby. Hemolytic disease of the newborn, anti-Rh antibodies could develop in the mother, and they could cross the placenta, destroying the Rh positive fetus red blood cells. And the baby could die or become very anemic. So this is why blood type is important in pregnancy. The first pregnancy with a mom, if she hasn't created the antibodies yet against an Rh positive fetus, will be okay, but in subsequent pregnancies, she'll have those antibodies circulating in her system, and they could cross the placenta and the baby could die. So they'll check your blood type when pregnant, and they'll give you a RhoGAM shot, which ear injection, and it's a serum containing antibodies against those Rh antigens. So it's given to an Rh negative mother to destroy any Rh positive fetal cells in her circulation, and thereby preventing her to produce any antibodies, basically against her baby cells. So this kind of explains how pregnancy works. An Rh positive and Rh negative person were to create a baby, the Rh positive baby forms from the dad, and then the Rh, after the next following delivery, the mother still forms anti-Rh antibodies against those babies' antigens that have been circulating in her blood. So now for next pregnancies with Rh positive fetuses, those antibodies could attack the baby's blood cells. Blood clotting are steps that occur once a blood vessel is cut. The vessel will constrict. So let's say you get injured, either cut, minimally or very invasively. The vessel will constrict and the platelets form a plug that seals the leak so that blood doesn't leak into your interstitial fluid or to the exterior. Platelets will cling to collagen and produce a chemical that attracts more platelets. Aspirin actually prevents the formation of this chemical and therefore inhibits blood formation. So people who are elderly, who are known to have maybe heart disease, heart attacks, blood clots, they take an aspirin a day to help prevent this blood clot formation. And then a blood clot forms. There's key events in clot formation. Clotting factors are released from injured tissue and platelets. These factors convert an inactive blood protein to prothrombin activator. And prothrombin activator converts to prothrombin, which is the plasma protein produced by the liver, to an active form, thrombin. Thrombin causes fibrinogen to form long strands of fibrin, and fibrin then strands form like a web or a trap for these red blood cells and forms a clot. When the wound is healed, the enzyme plasmin, formed from plasminogen, digests the fibrin strands of the clot, so it gets rid of the clot then, so that blood can then freely flow. So these are the steps of blood clot formation. If even one of the clotting factors is lacking, the process can be slowed or completely blocked. Vitamin K is important, and it's needed to synthesize prothrombin in the liver, and clotting will not occur without it. And two sources of vitamin K can be from your diet or intestinal bacteria. Disorders of blood clots. Hemophilia is an inherited condition characterized by excessive bleeding, and it's caused by a faulty gene involved in the production of clotting factors, and treatment involves the restoration of the missing clotting factor. Formation of unnecessary blood clots can have immediate health consequences, and this is where usually you come into problems, usually due to diet and exercise. Clots can disrupt blood flow and cause heart attack or stroke in the brain. A clot that continues to circulate is called an embolus, and clots can circulate and then go to your lungs and form a blockage in your lungs, which can also be deadly because you won't be able to get gas exchange to occur. And a clot that lodges in an unbroken vessel is called a thrombus. So take a look at this video as well. After this, you should be able to know, again, use this as a checklist to just double check that you've been learning everything. And thanks for watching.